Confessions of a Famous Former Singer.
Do you believe that the melodies we hear here on earth can echo in the deepest abyss of hell? This is a question that few dare to ask, but the answer may be darker than we imagine. What you're about to hear is not just a story, but a shocking revelation that will challenge everything you think about music, fame, and eternal destiny. Get ready, because today we're going to explore the most terrifying notes to ever resonate from the depths of hell. Imagine for a moment a place where screams mix with distorted melodies, where sound is not just heard, but felt as stabs that echo in the soul. There, every chord, every vibration carries a dark message, an eternal sentence. Hell, that place of torment that many believe to be just a metaphor, has revealed secrets that few can bear. These revelations are not just warnings, but an urgent call to reflect on the pitfalls that music and success can hide. A former famous singer who lived on applause and glory reached the limit between the sky and the abyss. He witnessed something that goes far beyond what was imaginable. The songs and chords that, instead of elevating, lead to perdition. He heard the notes that enslave soul, a sound no one should know. What did he discover? Music, with its power to move, connect, and inspire, can also carry hidden messages that seduce and imprison. But what if these messages originated from spiritual forces that want to turn you away from God? What if hell used melodies to capture hearts and seal destinies? Think of the fame, the spotlight, the deafening applause. Many seek this at any cost, without realizing that they may be trading their souls for a brief moment of glory. This testimony is living proof of that, a warning you cannot ignore. When describing what he saw in hell, this singer revealed scenarios of unfathomable darkness, where each chord carried an indescribable torment. He heard distorted songs, instruments that once brought joy being used to inflict pain. The melody of darkness echoes as a reminder of what could have been and what was lost forever. The revelations of hell are not just horror stories, but a mirror of the choices we make every day. Have you ever stopped to think about the subliminal messages you consume? In the influence that songs have on your thoughts and emotions? With each passing second, more people are attracted to rhythms that, although they seem harmless, carry a spiritual vibration capable of influencing destinies. It is no coincidence that music has always been one of the most powerful tools, both for good and for evil. Today, you will discover what many try to hide, the dark secrets behind songs that conquer millions. Prepare to hear about an experience that not only reveals the torments of hell, but also brings profound spiritual lessons. Hell is real, and its connection to the choices we make here on earth, including the music we consume, may be more direct than we realize. What if the melodies you hear today were the soundtrack to your eternity? What I saw in hell is something no one should ignore. This story is not just about fame, music, or power, but about how seemingly simple decisions can take us to places we never imagined. And now, it's time to open your ears, mind, and heart to a testimony that promises to shake your convictions. If you've made it this far, it's because this message has already started to touch your heart. Before we continue with the revelations that changed a life forever, I want to make a special invitation. Leave your prayer request in the comment. Whatever situation you are facing, time of doubt, anguish, or even a spiritual struggle, let's pray together. Prayer is one of the most powerful weapons we have to connect with God, seek answers, and find strength to overcome any storm. This is the time to join your voice with thousands of other people who are here, seeking the same transformation. Every comment you leave is not just written words. It is a cry that reaches heaven. Don't underestimate the power of prayer. Many lives have been transformed by intercession and faith in a God who hears and responds. And if this message already made sense to you, don't forget to leave a like. Not only does this help this content reach more people who need to hear these truths, but it also shows that you value these messages of hope and spiritual alertness. Also, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any revelation. We have so much more to share, and I want you to be part of this journey. Now write your prayer request. Let's intercede for each other, because together we are stronger. What you are about to discover could change not only your perspective, but also your spiritual life. This is just the beginning. The story of a former famous singer who, from the top of the world, experienced the deepest abyss is more than a story of transformation. It's a wake-up call for all of us. This man, who for years was in the spotlight, acclaimed by crowds, lived surrounded by everything that many desire: money, fame, prestige, and the power to influence. But while the world applauded him, his soul was increasingly distant from God. He didn't know it, but every chord he sang and every note he played had an impact far greater than he could imagine, reverberating in dimensions he never believed were real. On the outside, he seemed to have everything, but inside, there was a void that not even fame could fill. As time went by, he gave in to the temptations that accompanied his career: addictions, destructive relationships, self-centeredness, and a life without spiritual purpose. The glare from the stages was so intense that it blinded your vision to the things that really mattered. He never thought about hell, heaven, or salvation. These concepts seemed as distant as the days of simplicity he left behind when he chose music as a career. And, like many others, he became a hostage to what he created. His songs, so loved by the public, became a reflection of his life. Superficial, soulless, and in many cases, full of messages that he didn't even fully understand. He never questioned the influence his compositions could have on people. For him, they were just songs. But for those who consumed his art, they were a door to emotions and thoughts that could shape decisions and behaviors until something changed. Success began to lose its luster, and the emptiness that he had always ignored began to grow inside him, like a shadow that followed him around every corner. He began to realize that the applause that supported him was momentary, and Thessalon's after the shows was deafening. The parties became tiring, the relationships lost their intensity, and for the first time in years, he asked himself, "Where is all this taking me?" But even with these doubts running through his mind, he was not prepared for the answer that would come. It was at a time of crisis that his life took an unexpected turn. He remembers being alone, the height of despair, searching for something that could fill that void. What happened next changed his life forever. He says it was as if his soul was ripped from his body, thrown into a place that defied all logic and understanding. He was in an abyss, surrounded by darkness, scream, and a presence so oppressive that he could barely breathe. He realized he was in a place that many talk about, but few believe in: hell. There, as he tried to understand what was happening, he began to hear sound. They were not screams or laments, although those were also present, but melodies. He recognized some of them. They were songs that he himself had composed, played in a distorted and grotesque way. Each note felt like a blade cutting through your soul. He heard the echoes of his own successes, now transformed into trails of torment. It was at that moment that he realized the impact of his creation. He had used his talent to create something that, instead of building, he destroyed. And the consequences were more real than he could ever imagine. This singer, who previously lived for applause, now understood the weight of his choices. He couldn't ignore the fact that his songs, which he considered harmless, had the power to influence people in ways he had never considered. He saw scenes of people being swept away by those same melodies, trapped in a cycle of torment that seemed to have no end. It was a shock to realize that what he had created on earth not only echoed in hell, but had also contributed to the damnation of other souls. This experience, as terrifying as it was also a moment of revelation. He understood that his choices, both in music and in his personal life, were not neutral. Every chord, every lyric, every decision had eternal consequences. He began to reflect on the opportunities he had to use his voice for something greater, for something that could lead people into the light rather than the darkness. but at that moment, it seemed too late. This contextualization is not just about the story of a famous former singer, but about the spiritual reality that we often ignore. How many times do we consume content, music, or messages without considering the impact they have on our soul? How many times do we choose paths that seem attractive, but that take us away from God? This story is an invitation to reflect on our own choices and the influence we have on others. Now, I want you to think about this. What are the songs that have been playing the soundtrack to your life? Have you ever stopped to reflect on the messages you consume daily? Leave in the comments the name of a song that marked your life, good or bad. And let's talk about the impact it may have had. Your story can help others see what may still be hidden. The transformation of this former singer began in an unexpected and breathtaking moment. He remembers with precision the day everything changed. It was an ordinary night, apparently without anything extraordinary, but the truth is that his soul was already crying out for answers, even if he didn't know it yet. After years of living a life of excess and ignoring signs that pointed to something greater, he finally reached the limit of his existence. That night would be marked as the moment he crossed an invisible line, a line that separated the physical world from the spiritual. It all started with an overwhelming feeling of emptiness. He felt like he was falling. Even Ash sat on the couch in his luxurious home, surrounded by trophies and mementos from a career that seemed so brilliant to the outside world. What no one knew was that, behind the curtains of fame, his soul was shattered. He hadn't slept well for days, being haunted by repetitive nightmares that seemed more and more real. In these visions, he heard fragments of his own music, but the sounds were different, as if they were absorbed by a heavy, dark environment. That night, something broke inside him. He describes how an invisible force began to take over his body, leaving him immobile. The room began to spin, and the reality around him distorted. He didn't know if he was dreaming, if he had died, or if he was going crazy. All he knew was that he suddenly felt like he was being ripped away from himself. It was then that he realized he was in a completely different place, a place he didn't recognize, but instinctively knew was hell. This place was nothing like the caricatured descriptions he had heard about. There was no devil with a trident or a cave of fire. Instead, he saw a suffocating vastness, an endless abyss, where the shadows seemed alive, and the air was filled with a spiritual weight that crushed him. The sense of despair was so deep that he said it was almost palpable. Hell was not just a place of physical suffering. It was a place of emotional suffering, where every mistake and every wrong choice echoed like endless screams in your mind. He started listening to songs. At first, they looked familiar, but he soon realized something was wrong. They were his own compositions, ones he had created during his career, but they were distorted, filled with an agony he had never associated with them before. Each melody seemed charged with accusation, as if each note was a sentence against him. He tried to cover his ears. The sounds wouldn't stop. They came from inside him, like a memory that couldn't be erased. He described this moment as a confrontation with his own soul. He saw images of crowds singing his songs, surrendered to the rhythm and lyrics, but at the same time trapped in invisible chains. It was as if the songs, which he thought were just entertainment, were actually instruments that pulled people into that same abyss. He saw himself as an unwitting participant in something far greater than he could comprehend, as if there was a spiritual battle going on while he, on earth, was distracted by fame and momentary pleasure. As he walked through that place, he began to hear voices. They were not human voices, but dark whispers that surrounded him. He couldn't identify the words, but he knew they were accusations. He felt the presence of something watching him, something that seemed to feed on his anguish. He tried to scream, but his voice wouldn't come out. It was as if hell itself silenced any attempt at outcry. With each step, he saw more disturbing scenes. He saw people he recognized. Some were industry colleagues, others were fans he had met throughout his career. They were trapped in endless cycles of suffering, as if they were reliving the worst moments of their lives over and over again. Some were surrounded by objects that symbolized their sin: money, drugs, musical instruments, all of which were transformed into tools of spiritual torture. HellHe tried to get closer to some of these people, but he couldn't reach them. It was as if an invisible barrier prevented him from interacting. In the midst of this chaos, he began to feel something different, a lightness almost imperceptible, as if a greater presence was beginning to manifest itself. It wasn't a complete relief, but it was enough for him to realize that there was still hope, however small it was. At that moment, he began to hear a voice that echoed throughout that dark place. The voice was not one of condemnation, but of warning. She told him he still had a choice, that his time on earth was not over, but that he needed to understand the gravity of his actions and the impact they had on other people. If you've come this far, stop and reflect. What have you done with the talents God gave you? What kind of legacy are you leaving? I want you to comment right now, right here. I choose a legacy of light. Write this down, because every word we declare has power. Your choice could be the beginning of a new story, just like it was for this singer. Don't ignore the signs. Write your commitment in the comments and allow it to begin to transform your life. Upon hearing that voice that echoed across the abyss, he felt a mixture of fear and fascination, as if he were facing something that surpassed his human understanding. But his surroundings didn't give him time to breathe or fully understand what was happening. The environment around him was suffocating, a vast expanse of darkness that seemed never-ending, but at the same time pulsed with a sinister energy. It was as if every particle of that place was alive, carrying a pain that could not be described in words. He realized that he was not just in a physical place, but in a dimension where everything was intensely emotional and spiritual. The sounds around him were a chapter in themselves. Silence did not exist in hell. It was filled with an endless cacophony of screams, wails, and what he identified as distorted music. These songs, unlike anything he had ever heard, did not come from instruments or voices, but seemed to be born from the environment itself. He could feel the vibrations penetrating his soul, each note bringing back memories and feelings he would rather forget. He recognized, with horror, that some of these melodies were fragments of his own creation, songs he composed that played on the radio, on stages, and on the playlists of millions, now resonated there like trails of torment. The music in hell was not simply a sound. She had weight, a density that seemed to envelop every cell of her being. It was as if each chord carried a coded message, revealing the consequences of choices that, on earth, seemed so small and insignificant. He heard his lyrics being sung by voices that were not human, voices that sounded like the lament of damned souls, mixed with subtle mockery. It was a terrifying mixture of pain and sarcasm, as if the screams and laughter were intertwined in a disturbing harmony. He described a specific moment when he heard one of his most famous songs being played. On Earth, this song was seen as a celebratory anthem, a hit that brought people together at parties and events. But here, in hell, she sounded completely different. Every word he wrote, every melody he created, now seemed like a weapon used against him and those who were influenced by his work. He saw images projected in front of him, scenes of people listening to his music, dancing, singing along, but not realizing they were being ensnared by invisible chains. He felt the weight of his responsibility, as if every soul connected to those notes was somehow linked to the destiny he now experienced. As he walked around that place, he began to realize that hell was not only a place of punishment, but also a place of exposure. Every mistake, every selfish choice, every wasted opportunity was brought to the surface and amplified. The songs he composed were not just sounds, they were reflections of who he was, his intentions, his values, or lack thereof. He began to wonder, what was I really conveying through my art? It was as if hell was a dark mirror, showing him everything he had tried to ignore or justify while he was alive. He saw figures approaching, silhouettes that seemed to emerge from the shadows. These figures carried instruments that he recognized, but they were transformed almost beyond recognition. Guitars, pianos, drums, they all looked broken, but they still made sounds. These instruments were played by entities he described as grotesque, beings with distorted shapes, empty eyes, and a constant smile that seemed to mock their pain. They played their music, but in such a dissonant and chaotic way that it felt like a direct attack on your soul. He tried to look away, but he couldn't. He was trapped in that macabre spectacle. Every step he took seemed to take him to new scenarios, each one more disturbing than the last. He saw rivers of fire that not only burned, but seemed to sing, emitting sharp sound that pierced his mind. Like knives, he saw souls floating in liquid darkness, trying to escape, but always being pulled back by invisible currents that seemed made of their own choices. He realized that hell was more than a place of punishment. It was a place of eternal remembrance, where every mistake made on earth became part of the landscape. He tried to scream, tried to ask for help, but his voice wouldn't come. It was as if that place nullified any attempt at outcry. He realized that he was completely alone, even though he was surrounded by multitudes of souls. The isolation was so intense that it felt like torture in itself. He began to understand that hell was not just about physical pain, but about an emotional and spiritual pain that consumed every shred of hope. Now, I want you to think about this. What if the things you consume every day, music, words, messages, are shaping your eternity without you even realizing it? I want you to share something simple but powerful. I choose words and music that uplift my soul. Write this in the comments because your words have power, and by declaring this, you are already taking a step towards transforming your life. Every choice counts. Write and share your reflections. Amid the chaos that surrounded him, something began to stand out more and more clearly: the devastating power of music in a spiritual context. In that dark place, he realized that music was not just a form of entertainment, but a force, the power to shape souls and destinies for both light and darkness. Until then, he had treated music as something simple, something created to satisfy momentary tastes, but what he saw in hell completely changed his view. It was as if the melodies carried an invisible spiritual signature, something that connected directly with people's essence. He remembered all the times he took the stage, feeling the energy of thousands of people singing his songs in unison. At that moment, he thought that it was just a reflection of his popularity, but now he understood that it was something much bigger. The crowds that sang with him were, in fact, being attracted by a current that he himself helped to create. Hell, he saw clearly how his lyrics and melodies had become spiritual portals, leading souls to an influence he had never fully understood. The music he considered harmless carried seeds of behaviors, feelings, and thoughts that could positively transform or devastate an entire life. As he walked through the stifling environment, he began to reflect on the standards he had followed throughout his career. Many of their songs were created under pressure, following trends that promised commercial success, without any concern for the emotional or spiritual impact they could cause. The lyrics, which often exalted hedonism, pride, selfishness, and even seemingly harmless rebellion, now seemed like dangerous weapons in the hands of forces he didn't even know existed. In hell, those letters weren't just words. They were statements that vibrated in the environment like echoes that never ceased. He began to realize how music could manipulate emotions so profoundly that it could even alter a person's spiritual state. In hell, each note seemed charged with a specific intention, as if the sounds were designed to imprison, confuse, and weaken. He saw people who were completely consumed by melodies that, on earth, were worshipped. These songs not only influenced their behavior, but also became part of their identity. He understood that while on earth many people choose music based on beats, styles, or lyrics that resonate with their feelings, in reality, These choices spiritually connect these people to an invisible energy. In one of the scenes he witnessed, there was a woman he recognized as a former fan. HellHe saw her in a state of complete despair, continually reliving moments of listening to her songs. It was as if those melodies were chains that held her in that place. He described how the words he had written, and which seemed so trivial at the time of composition, now sounded like statements of condemnation. It was impossible for him to take his eyes off that scene. He felt helpless, but at the same time full of guilt, because he knew he had contributed to this. Another revelation he received was about the original purpose of the song. He heard a voice that explained that music was created as a means of connecting with the divine, as a way to elevate the human spirit and bring light to the world. But over time, music was corrupted, transformed into a tool that often feeds the ego, the desire for power, and the distractions of the soul. He began to understand that music, being so powerful, should never be used without responsibility. Each note, each melody, carries with it an impact that goes far beyond what the ears can capture. This revelation also led him to reflect on the influence of the music industry itself. He realized that many artists like himself were so immersed in the desire to achieve fame and success that they completely ignored the spiritual impact of their creation. To him, it was now clear that there was a spiritual battle being waged in music. Many of the songs that dominated the charts were actually silent weapons, shaping thoughts, encouraging destructive behavior, and opening spiritual doors that people couldn't see. Eventually, he began to wonder what he could have done differently. What if he had used his talent to create something that truly uplifted, something that brought hope and connection to the divine? He knew it was too late to change the past, but he felt driven to do something with the second chance he somehow believed he was being given. The power of music would never be ignored by him again. He knew his story needed to be told, not as a tale of despair, but as a warning so that others would not make the same mistakes. Now, I want you to stop for a moment and think, what kind of music have you been consuming? Have you ever wondered what messages they carry, or what spiritual doors they might be opening in your life? I want you to comment, I choose music that uplifts my soul. Write this down right now, because it's important to declare the change you want to see in your life. Share your experience. Say how music has impacted you, both positively and negatively. Your words can be a point of reflection for others who are reading. Every comment is a seed of change. As he remained in that place of shadows and torment, something even more terrifying began to happen. He realized that he was not alone, that hell was inhabited by entities that seemed to feed on the despair and pain of those who were there. These creatures, which he described as grotesque distortions of what might once have been human, had a look that passed through him. They seemed to not only see his physical appearance, but every thought, every feeling, and, worse yet, every character flaw. Being in front of these entities was like being completely exposed, with nowhere to hide. These figures did not need to speak to impose terror. Her mere presence carried a force that crushed him. It was as if each one was a living manifestation of the mistakes he had made, the choices he had ignored. Their proximity was oppressive, and he felt like his life energy was being drained as they surrounded him. Some held objects that looked like instruments of torture, but instead of using them physically, these objects exuded an aura that brought up painful memories and regrets that he desperately tried to erase. He saw, for example, a creature holding something that looked like a torn sheet of music, but every line of that sheet of music seemed to be written with the times when he had used his talent in a selfish or destructive way. In a moment, he described as especially harrowing, one of the entities approached him and finally spoke. His voice was not like that of a human being. It seemed to echo inside him, resonating directly into his soul. She didn't scream, but each word carried the weight of a sentence. "You belong to us," the entity said, in a tone so cold and cutting that it seemed like an irrevocable sentence. He tried to argue, tried to protest, but the words wouldn't come out. It was as if his own voice had been taken away, as if he no longer had the right to defend himself. he realized that these entities were not just there to punish him, they were there to teach, but not in a redemptive way. It was as if hell were a twisted classroom, where lessons were learned by force and learning came through pain. He felt that each creature was a reflection of something he had ignored throughout his life. Each carried a specific message, a grim reminder of how her choices had shaped her destiny and the destinies of others. One entity in particular held what seemed like an endless list of names. He realized that every name on that list was someone who had been influenced by his music, someone whose life had been touched by his lyric, but in a way he now saw as harmful. The entity did not need to say anything. The sight of that list was enough to make him feel the crushing weight of his responsibility. He also began to hear voices other than those of the creatures. They came from all sides, whispering, murmuring, some even shouting. They were the voices of the people he had directly affected during his life. Some of them blamed him, others simply cried, but they all had something in common. They were trapped in a cycle of pain that seemed to have no end. He couldn't ignore these voices. They surrounded him, increasing his guilt, making it impossible for him to escape the reality of what he had done. In between these revelations, there were moments when he felt something different, something almost subtle amidst the chaos. He realized that some of the messages he received were not condemnation, but warning. One of the entities, which seemed less aggressive than the others, spoke directly to him. His voice was clearer, almost like that of a dark mentor, but with an authority he couldn't question. She said, "Everything you create has a purpose. What you chose to create was used against you, but the choices are still yours." Those words hit him with a force he couldn't explain. He realized that even in that place of torment, there was a thread of choice, a small window for reflection. It wasn't a relief, but it was a reminder that his life, no matter how much damage it had caused, still had some meaning. Another entity, darker and more imposing, made an even more disturbing revelation. She said that music, when created with evil or selfish intentions, becomes a kind of spiritual trap. People who listen to these songs often don't realize that they are connecting to something much bigger than just a rhythm or a melody. Each lyric carried a spiritual signature, and in the case of his songs, many of them were connected to feelings of emptiness, despair, and pride that he himself had felt while writing them. Finally, he saw a scene that left a deep impression on him. He saw a huge crowd of souls, all moving to the sound of a song that he immediately recognized as one of his most famous compositions. It was an apocalyptic vision. Thousands of people trapped in a hypnotic movement, unable to stop, as if the music were an invisible current pushing them deeper and deeper into the abyss. He tried to shout to warn them, but it was too late. Music had already become part of them. Now, stop and think. What is the spiritual signature of your choices? Comment. I choose Toby, a positive influence. These words may seem simple, but they have a profound impact. I want to know what you think about this. Leave your thoughts in the comments and share your experience. Every word you write is a step towards transformation. As he was surrounded by those entities and the crushing weight of the voices and memories that echoed around him, something began to change in the environment. The darkness seemed to gain even more density, making the air practically unbreathable. He felt the ground beneath his feet shake, as if something bigger was approaching. Everything around him seemed to conspire to make him give in completely to despair, as if there was no longer any way out or hope. But deep in his soul, a small flicker of resistance urged him not to give up. He didn't know exactly where this strength came from, but it kept him moving forward, even if each step was an almost impossible effort. It was at that moment that he realized that hell was not just a place of torment, but a place of confrontation. Not a physical confrontation, but a spiritual one, where each person was brought face to face with the consequences of their choices and the reality of what they had become. He understood that, however terrifying it was, everything that was happening was part of something bigger, a process that was forcing him to face what he had avoided his entire life. Hell, in a way, was a distorted reflection of himself, where his failures, regrets, and sins took shape and confronted him mercilessly. Suddenly, a distinct voice echoed in the room. It wasn't like the voices of the entities that had tormented him. Until that moment, this one was different, powerful, authoritative, but with a calm that seemed to diffuse all the chaos around her. It was as if that voice was capable of silencing the shadows, of imposing order in the midst of chaos. He couldn't identify where it came from, but he immediately felt that it was unlike anything he had experienced so far. The voice didn't accuse him, but it didn't offer immediate comfort either. Instead, she seemed to bring a truth he couldn't ignore. "You have been given a gift," said the voice, "but you used this gift to feed your vanity and build an empire that only served yourself." Those words hit him like an overwhelming wave. He realized that while he was on Earth, his life was driven by selfish desires. His music, his fame, and his achievements were never used for anything greater than satisfying his own pride. He thought he was just living his life, but now he understood that his actions, no matter how insignificant they seemed, had a much deeper spiritual impact than he realized. He began to question everything he had done, every time he ignored the call to something greater, every opportunity he had wasted to be a positive influence in people's lives. The voice continued, revealing truths even harder to hear. "You not only destroyed yourself, but also led others to the abyss. You were an instrument, but not in the hands of God." Those words made him fall to his knees. He had never thought of his music or his life this way. He had always believed he was just an ordinary person trying to survive and find happiness. But now he saw clearly that his impact went far beyond his own intention. He realized that by ignoring the purpose he was created for, he had become a tool for something he didn't even understand. He tried to justify himself, even though he knew it was useless. He tried to find excuses. Think of moments when he had tried to do something good, but everything seemed small and insignificant compared to the reality that was being exposed. He was in direct confrontation with his own soul, without any mask, without any distraction. He saw clearly how every choice he made on Earth led him to that moment. There was no one to blame but himself. As this truth was revealed to him, the entities around him began to stir. They seemed uncomfortable, almost weakened, as if the presence of that voice was neutralizing their power. He felt a change in the environment, something he couldn't explain, but which brought a small ray of hope in the midst of despair. The voice continued, "You still have a choice. Even now, in the midst of darkness, there is a light waiting for you, but you must decide." These words took him by surprise. He had never considered that there might be a choice in this place. Everything seemed so definitive, so irreversible. But that voice was clear, and her words carried an authority he couldn't ignore. He felt something inside him change. It wasn't a complete change, but a small beginning, like a flame lit in the middle of a dark night. He realized that even in hell, he still had a responsibility. He could still decide how to respond to what was happening. This realization was like an anchor that kept him from being completely consumed by despair. Now, I want you to think with me. What would you do if you were in a confrontation like this? If everything you have ever done was placed before you, how would you respond? I want you to write in the comments, "I choose to live with purpose." These words are more than a statement. They are a decision that could start to change everything. Share your reflections and experiences. Your story could be just what someone needs to find the light in the darkness. Comment now. From the moment that powerful voice confronted him, something began to change within him. It wasn't a complete relief, but a new realization took shape. As if a blindfold had been removed from his spiritual eye, he began to understand, with an almost painful clarity, the truths he had neglected all his life. The lessons he received there were not just warnings. They were profound revelations that showed how far he had strayed from his purpose, and how each choice, no matter how small, carried eternal consequences. One of the first lessons he learned was about the devastating impact of spiritual neglect. Heelways believed that his decisions, especially related to his career, were purely personal, something that affected only himself. But there, in hell, he realized that there is no neutrality in the spiritual world. Every decision we make, every word we speak, every action we perform carries a spiritual charge, whether for construction or destruction. There is no such thing as indifference in the spiritual realm. He saw how his actions, which seemed so harmless on earth, had influenced not only his own life, but also those of thousands of people who crossed his path. He saw images projected before him, as if he were watching a film chronicling the most significant moments of his life. Every wrong choice was highlighted. Every time he chose to ignore God's call, take the easy path. He saw the consequences of these choices not only in his own life, but in the lives of others. This left him completely crushed as he realized that in his pursuit of fame and success, he had left a trail of spiritual destruction that affected not only him, but also many souls around him. Another lesson that stuck deeply in his mind was about the deceptive nature of pride. Pride, which he had previously seen as something natural, as part of his self-confidence and charisma, now seemed one of the most destructive elements of his personality. He realized that pride was the door that paved the way for many other mistakes. It was pride that made him ignore the subtle warnings he received throughout his life. It was pride that led him to believe that he was solely responsible for his success, that everything he achieved was the result of his own efforts, without ever recognizing the role of God or considering the impact of his actions on others. In hell, he understood that pride is an invisible chain, which slowly imprisons until it is too late to notice. Furthermore, he was also confronted with a truth he had never considered. Time is the most precious resource we have on earth. He saw how he had wasted years of his life seeking recognition and temporary pleasures, while neglecting the things that really mattered. Here called moments when he could have chosen to spend more time with his family, help someone in need, or even use his music to convey a message of hope. But instead, he chose the path of self-satisfaction, never considering that time is limited and that every second is an opportunity to build something eternal. Another important lesson he received was about the responsibility we have with the gifts God gave us. In his case, music was an incredible gift, a talent that could have been used to positively impact the world and bring people closer to God. But he realized that he had used this talent selfishly, just to feed his vanity and achieve his own goal. He understood that the gifts we receive are not for our exclusive benefit, but to serve a greater purpose, to be tools of transformation and light in a world full of darkness. However, the most profound lesson he learned was about the importance of repentance. He realized that even though he was in a place of torment, he still had a chance. Repentance, which he had always seen as a distant and almost outdated concept, now became his only hope. He understood that repentance is not just about asking for forgiveness, but about aerial change of heart, a conscious decision to turn your back on what is wrong and follow a new path. He began to see that even in hell, there was an opportunity to reconnect with God, as long as he was willing to acknowledge his mistakes and surrender completely. What struck him most was how each of these lessons seemed to be interconnected. Pride fueled spiritual neglect, which in turn led to mismanagement of time and gifts. It was all part of a cycle that took him further and further away from his original purpose. But at the same time, he began to realize that the solution to all of this was simple and straightforward: humility, surrender, and a genuine reconnection with God. He saw that, even in the midst of chaos and pain, there was a way back, but it required a conscious and definitive decision. Now, I want you to stop for a moment and reflect. How have you used the gifts that God gave you? Are you taking advantage of the time to build something eternal, or have you been getting lost in the distractions of life? Comment here. I choose to use my gifts to glorify God. Your words are important, not just for you, but for those who read it and are also seeking transformation. Share your reflections and let this be the start of something new in your life. After experiencing all that in hell, he began to feel something different. It wasn't immediate, but as if a small spark of light tried to pierce through the overwhelming darkness. He was still surrounded by the revelation, the entities and the truths that confronted him like cruel mirrors of his own existence. However, the voice that warned him earlier spoke again, this time with a more direct, more imperative tone. You saw and heard. Now, it's up to you to decide what you do with it. This is not a second chance to continue living the same way. This is the beginning of a transformation. Take this message and use it to warn others, to prevent them from walking the same path as you. These words not only echoed in his mind, but seemed to permeate his soul. He knew at that moment that this was not an ordinary nightmare, nor an experience that could be ignored. The weight of his responsibility was immense. He understood that everything he experienced there, every terrifying vision, every crushing revelation, was not just for him. He was supposed to become a messenger, but he still didn't know how he could carry such a burden. After all, he was not a preacher, a pastor, someone that society considered spiritually fit to teach. He was a man marked by mistakes, selfish choices, and a life full of excesses. How could he become an instrument of change? That was when the voice spoke again. I don't choose the perfect ones. I choose the ones available. These words were like a ray of hope in the midst of darkness. He realized that despite his mistakes, there was something greater operating there, something that saw beyond his failures. This realization brought with it a new perspective, a responsibility he could no longer ignore. He was overcome by a desire to get out of that place and do something meaningful with the time he had left. He didn't know how long he would have, or how he would be welcomed back into the world, but he felt there was a mission waiting for him. Suddenly, the darkness around him began to dissipate, as if the shadows were being pushed away by a light he couldn't fully see. He describes that moment as a second birth, a feeling of being pulled back into life, but carrying the weight of everything he had learned in hell. When he opened his eyes again, he was in a hospital room, surrounded by machines and nurses who seemed relieved to see him return to consciousness. He didn't understand exactly how he had survived, but he knew, deep in his soul, that he was there for a greater reason. During the first few days after returning, he felt a mixture of confusion, guilt, and a strong urge to act. The images of hell, the distorted music, the entities, and the spiritual lessons were still vivid in his mind. He could barely sleep, because every time he closed his eyes, it was like he was transported back to that place. But instead of paralyzing him, this torment motivated him to start writing down everything he saw and heard. He felt that if he didn't get out what was on his mind, he would be consumed by those memories. However, it wasn't easy. He faced internal doubts that almost silenced him. Who will believe me? Will people think I've gone crazy? He constantly asked himself, but at the same time, he felt an urgency that he couldn't ignore. He began sharing his story with those close to him, friends, family, even strangers who seemed to cross his path as part of a greater plan. He realized that the more he talked, the more impact his story had on people. Some cried, others were silent, but almost everyone reacted with a mixture of surprise and reflection. He then made the decision to use his public experience and his career for something completely different. Instead of composing music that extolled the ephemeral pleasures of life, he began writing songs that conveyed messages of hope, faith, and repentance. His compositions gained a depth he had never explored before because he now understood the power of music as a spiritual tool. He knew that every note, every verse carried a purpose and could be used to build or to destroy. His new mission was to use his music to build, to bring light where before there was only darkness. Furthermore, he began recording videos and giving testimonies, even though this put him in a vulnerable position. He knew that he would be criticized, that many people would doubt him, but he also knew that he could no longer keep what he had learned to himself. His goal was simple: share his story so others wouldn't have to go through what he did. He wanted to be a warning, a voice to remind people that there is a spiritual reality that many ignore. Now, think about it. If you had the opportunity to change your life today, would you take it? Comment here. I choose to be a voice of hope. Your words have power, and they can be the beginning of a transformation not only in your life, but in the lives of those who read the comment. Share your story. Talk about how you have felt the impact of choices and decisions in your life. Together, we can spread messages that touch and transform lives. Leave your comment and let's continue on this journey of reflection and change. He knew his life would never be the same. The return to reality, loaded with everything I had witnessed, was not a simple transition. Every step he took, every word he said, seemed carried with a greater weight, as if he were walking on a fragile bridge between the darkness he experienced and the light he now wanted to follow. But he understood that he could not return to the comfort zone or to the old patterns that led him to live so far from his purpose. The experience in hell had not been just a torment. It had been a warning, a direct call for transformation. He began to realize that, more than sharing his story, he needed to invite other people to reflect on their own lives. He knew that people often live in a state of distraction, immersed in the rush of everyday life, without realizing that every choice they make is shaping something much bigger than the present. It was then that he decided that his mission would be a constant call for people to open their eyes and understand the seriousness of their actions, their thoughts, and the influences they allowed into their lives. He reflected on how, for a long time, he himself ignored the signs. How many times has he heard advice to change? How many times have you felt a call to something greater within yourself, but decided to ignore it? How many opportunities did he have to use his music, his influence, and his platform to bring hope and light, but chose to feed his own ego? These reflections led him to realize that many people live the same way he did, thinking they have total control over their lives, that they can make decisions without considering their spiritual consequences, that they can ignore warnings without consequences. But he knew, now more than ever, that this perception was wrong. His appeal was straightforward. The choices you make matter. He talked about how every decision, even those that seem insignificant, carries spiritual weight. He mentioned how small concessions can turn into big traps. It all starts with something seemingly harmless, a song with a distorted message, an attitude of indifference towards others, a priority that puts material things above eternal value. He learned, painfully, that none of this goes unnoticed. Every act, every thought, every word creates an impact that goes far beyond what we can see. More than that, he spoke about the power of reconciliation and repentance. He knew that many people lived trapped in the past, believing that their mistakes were too big to be forgiven. But he also knew that this was one of the biggest lies that the dark spiritual world tells people. He insisted that it is never too late to return. It is never too late to start over. His own story was proof of this. Even after a lifetime of selfish choices, even after using his gifts in destructive ways, he was given a second chance. He knew this chance was something rare, something precious, and he wanted people to know that they didn't have to go that far into the abyss to realize it. He also talked about the need for vigilance. One of the greatest lessons he learned is that the spiritual world is constantly in motion, and we are often influenced without realizing. He warned about how the distractions of modern life can separate people from their spiritual connection. Simple things like excessive time on social media, the unrestrained consumption of purposeless content, and even the search for external validation can turn into traps. He said, "Be vigilant. Watch what you consume, what you allow into your mind and heart. All of this is shaping your eternity." Another essential part of his appeal was the call to responsibility. He wanted people to understand that each of them has an important role in the world. He said that no one is here by chance, that each person was created with a purpose, and that ignoring that purpose is one of the greatest tragedies that can happen. He talked about how we are called to be light in a world that is often immersed in darkness. "You have a gift," he would say. It could be your voice, your generosity, your ability to listen, your ability to teach. Whatever it is, use it for something greater. Use it to help others see the light. At the end of each conversation, he made a point of challenging people to reflect. He knew that transformation didn't just come from hearing stories or receiving moving messages, but from a conscious decision to change. He asked that each person who heard his story take a moment to reflect on their own life. Ask yourself, what have my choices been? Am I living according to the purpose for which I was created? What can I change today to start walking a different path? He asked these questions not as a judgment, but as an invitation, a call to action. And now, I want to ask you, what can you do today to reconnect with your purpose? What have you left aside that can bring light to your life and the lives of others? Comment here. I choose to live with purpose and vigilance. Leave your words recorded, because when we declare something, we are taking the first step towards transforming our reality. I want to hear your story, to know what this message awakened in you. Right now and be part of this current of reflection and change. Your participation matters more than you realize. If you've come this far, it's because something deep spoke to your heart. This message is not just another video. It is an invitation to reflect, transform, and connect with something greater. Every word, every revelation shared here has the purpose of impacting lives, of bringing light to situations that are often hidden in our daily lives. We want to know how this message resonated within you. Share in the comments, I felt God's voice in this video, and tell how this message touched your soul. Your testimony can inspire other people who are looking for answers and meaning in life. Remember, this space is more than a place to watch. It is a community of people in search of transformation and hope. Your interaction here not only strengthens this mission, but also helps this message reach more hearts that need to hear such profound and transformative truths. Before leaving, I want to remind you of the importance of subscribing to the channel. By doing this, you are ensuring that you continue to receive content that not only informs, but that edifies, challenges, and illuminates your path. Activate the bell so you don't miss any updates. Each video is made with dedication to bring messages that touch the soul and awaken you to something greater. Don't forget to leave your like. This simple gesture is a powerful way to support this mission, to show that you value content that goes beyond the superficial and helps impact lives. What's more, when you like, comment, and share, you are sowing a message of hope so that others can also be reached. Finally, I want to invite you to watch the next video, which is already appearing on the final screen. It is the continuation of this journey, bringing new revelations, reflections, and messages that can transform your view of life and the spiritual world. Be sure to check it out. Each video is a piece of this great mission that we are building together. May God bless your life abundantly, bringing peace, direction, and purpose to every step you take from now on. Remember, you are not alone on this journey. Thank you for being here, for opening your heart to this message, and for being part of this mission to bring light where there was once darkness. Until the next video,